Hello, everyone, and welcome into this episode of the Irish NFL Show with me, Colum Cronin. And I am delighted to be joined by one of my favorite guests. Delighted to welcome him back, JP Acosta. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Colin. Thanks for having me on again.
I Let's go with a broad question initially, and maybe I'll ask you to take off your Jaguars hat for this one. Did you, as we sit here, we're one game left in the season, the Super Bowl, but looking at it in its entirety, did you enjoy the 2023 season?
Oh, I loved it. I loved this season for what it brought us in terms of schematic changes in the NFL and just the difference in what offenses look like compared to where we were in like 2018. Of course, everybody's saying like, "Oh, scoring's down. That means the football's bad." No, this is great. This is what I've dreamed of. This is what I've hoped for. The defense is finally punched back against opposing NFL offenses, and now the cycle can continue to go around. Football is cyclical, as ideas get filtered from high school to college to the NFL. The NFL will start to make those popularized, and then the cycle will continue, and there's going to be constant punching and counterpunching for the offensive and defensive side of the ball. The defense is counterpunched already. Now it's time for the offense to throw out their punch again.
And on the defensive side of things, I suppose interested in what you have seen, because it feels like, yeah, this was a season where defenses definitely took they punch back, but they punch back in slightly different ways. And particularly, I suppose, what we saw perhaps from Mike McDonald and the Ravens, it it took some of what the Fangio scheme, a bit like I suppose the Shanahan scheme on offense, has been what people have maybe been kind of running and variants thereof, or it's certainly been the most prominent in the league over the past, half decade, certainly. But McDonald has taken this to a new level and added a lot of his own stuff, added wrinkles, a lot more disguises. I suppose what for you, what jumped out in terms of the punchback from defenses, and what is? Do you have any ideas on like what might we see from the McVays and the Shanahans and the Mike McDaniels next year in order to counter what defenses did this year?
So I think one of the biggest things that Mike McDonald did this year was his ability to generate pressure without always having to send all out blitzes. A lot of the pressures, it was something where not something, but it was sending four guys, but you didn't know which four they would be. It could be dropping both defensive tackles and bringing both nickels off the edges. It could be bringing a linebacker, dropping an edge guy. It could be bringing a corner from all the way off the backside. But you're always getting there with four, and that's how they led the NFL in sacks without having a superstar pass rusher on the edge. Justin Madubuike is a rising star, but he's not a certified pass rush legit threat yet. So the ability to generate pressure without risking structural integrity of the defense was something that I think defenses are going to start mimicking and start reinforcing with their defenses. Because one thing you want to do against the superhuman quarterbacks that we're seeing now is you want to force the issue. And by force the issue, I don't mean all out pressure, play cover one, because if you play guys like Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, they're just going to run. They can beat you with their legs now. But it's forcing the issue in terms of changing the picture up front, where it might look different compared to what you saw pre-snap. Now, offensively, I think Sean McVay and watching his Rams teams grow from 2018 to 2023 has been one of the coolest things in the NFL. He was a heavy outside zone boot action. We know Sean McVay to be kind of the another developer of the Shanahan outside zone, but this year they ran a lot more duo, a lot more gap scheme, power running, because they were seeing so many five-man fronts with the edges stacked. So there is no way to get around the edge, and you're forcing cutbacks into bodies. So you run duo, you run gap schemes, you run at these guys, you get vertical, and that's how their offense, kind of took off, even despite not having before what we thought before the season as much of a chance at contending. They took the Lions to the limit. So I think we're going to start seeing the punch back in terms of we're going to start seeing bigger personnel on offense. Uh, my co-writer Mark Schofield and I have this term "big boy grilling on the roof" offense. That's what we're going to get back into. A lot bigger personnel offensively, a lot more gap scheme running, and in that we're going to see a lot bigger personnel return on defense, which I think is going to affect how we scout and evaluate entering the NFL draft.
One of the things I suppose following those championship games, I consume a lot of NFL content. There was a lot of debate and differences of opinions on in terms of the future of the Lions and the Ravens and who should feel more optimistic and who should feel more pessimistic. And there were different reasons, given in terms of, I suppose, the Ravens. They have Lamar, but a lot of those defensive pieces might well be moving on. Mike McDonald, we don't know if he'll be moving on. For the Lions, obviously, they don't have a superstar QB, but they have a young roster. They have Dan Campbell, and now they have their OC coming back. I suppose from your perspective, JP, do you think one of those franchises has a rosier kind of outlook for 2024 than the other, or should they both be reasonably optimistic?
I think they can both be reasonably optimistic for the reasons that you said. I mean, the Ravens have Lamar Jackson. As long as you have an elite quarterback, that window is always going to be open. Losing Mike McDonald is going to hurt really bad. He is one of the rising stars in the industry, generally well respected, and we've seen what he can do as a play caller and a defensive designer of and structure of defenses. So, how they kind of negotiate the brain drain that leaves when McDonald leaves is going to be very interesting. But from the Lions' perspective, you keep Ben Johnson around. The Lions are still they're still a little ahead of schedule. Think about in 2021, they were rebuilding. They had 2 top 10 picks and they kind of turned it into this NFC championship contending team. So now you're like, okay, we're here. We almost made it to the top of the mountain, but we cannot stay here. We can't go into the season thinking if we just run it back, we'll be just in the same spot. There's stuff that has to there's stuff that has to improve. There's stuff that has to change because everything around you in the NFL is going to change as well. The Packers are getting a lot better. You're going to have to face them 2 times a year. Who knows what happens with the Bears and the Vikings? The Vikings are always going to be interesting because they have the talent. So you cannot stay complacent. That's the biggest thing that NFL teams cannot do. I mean, look at the team in the Super Bowl. Look at the Chiefs. They traded Tyreek Hill in 2021 and then made 2 straight Super Bowls after. So it's going to be really interesting to see where the Ravens and Lions go because neither of them have been very complacent in years past, just in their history. And the Dan Campbell teams have never been very complacent. They traded DeAndre Swift and took Jahmyr Gibbs, and that worked out really, really well. What they do with the Goff extension, because Jared Goff is going to get extended and he's going to get a lot of money. So now you're working within the margins of you're paying a quarterback big money. So now you don't have that same leeway as you used to. You can stack up all these draft picks on rookie deals and let them get good. Now you got to work within the margin. You got to find Jadeveon Clowney type signings like the Ravens did. So how they go about that is going to be a really interesting thing this year.
Yeah, I think certainly it will be once QBs move off those more team-friendly deals. The margins definitely narrow, unless you are the Chiefs and you've Patrick Mahomes, and even if he has the top cap hit in the league, it doesn't matter. You mentioned him earlier, and you're probably too young, but you mentioned Josh Allen. My comp for Josh Allen from the wrestling world is the Ultimate Warrior, because it is just chaos and energy and everything about it. You're afterwards you're left wondering what was that. It was magic and fantastic, but ultimately Warrior forever played second fiddle to Hulk Hogan. It appears Josh is going to play second fiddle to Patrick Mahomes, certainly at this point. So Warrior got to the top of the mountain eventually. Maybe for Josh, he can get there. But if you're the Bills at this point, JP, and you're coming off, I suppose, the season that they had, but realistically, the past 3-4 years that they have had. What do they need to do this off season to continue to, I guess, face the Chiefs and hopefully eventually slay the dragon?
So on the bright side for the Bills is all the depth guys that they thought weren't going to play, that we thought were kind of bad going into the season, turned out to be pretty good as soon as they kept getting reps. So now you can say you have that depth. You're going to get back Matt Milano. Of course, he's coming off a major injury, so how that looks is going to be very intriguing. Who knows what happens with Tre'Davious White, who's coming off of another major injury. They're getting old on the defensive side of the ball. They're getting very old. I think that's going to be something to watch out for. But I think their biggest need is getting an actual second receiver. Gabe Davis is hitting free agency. I would let Gabe Davis walk. He is football J.R. Smith in terms of sometimes he'll score 30 points. Sometimes he won't score, and he'll just be the worst player on the court. I think they need a legit second receiver next to Stephon Diggs, because the way that they want to play, they like to play, they can have it's perfectly fine to have another guy and like kind of let Stephon Diggs grow into like a 1B to someone's 1A. They don't have the 1A right now. Stephon Diggs is the 1A. And how Joe Brady managed Stephon Diggs and getting him targets was very interesting to watch after he took the job. They kind of traded off, it was like perfectly balanced, as all things should be. Ken Dorsey was feeding Stephon Diggs. Pass game looked really, really good. Run game stunk. They went 6-6. Joe Brady comes in. Run game looks great. Stephon Diggs can't get a target. You lose to the Chiefs. It's perfectly balanced, as all things should be. So Joe Brady needs to be able to find a balance between those two. It's great that you can run the ball really, really well now, but Stephon Diggs is one of your best offensive players. You got to find a way to get him involved. Maybe that's by getting another receiver to kind of take some of the heat, take some of the attention off of him. So how they go about addressing the team building this offseason is going to be huge, because, again, you can't run it back. Running it back is saying like, hey, we don't think anybody else in this division is going to get better. And the Jets are going to get Aaron Rodgers back. Who knows what that looks like? I mean, their defense played so well to the point that they were just outside the playoff hunt until Zach Wilson was just generally deemed like bad at football, of course. The Dolphins were right on the cusp of winning the division. Of course, the Dolphins have their own set of problems. And who knows what happens with the Patriots? They're still going to be they're going to be there. They're going to be there. But there are a whole bunch of more teams in the AFC. You got to climb that mountain once again. So you can't just sit there and be like, oh, we're going to be fine at the top. We don't need to change anything. Like, this is the perfect time to reinvent, because you have the quarterback. This is the time to maximize the margin for error.
This is way too early, but because for the Super Bowl it hasn't even happened. We've free agency and the draft to go. But of the teams who missed the playoffs this year, who are you kind of thinking next year they have a really good shot? I know you mentioned the Jets, and obviously they're getting Rodgers back, though that Athletic piece earlier on today wouldn't give me great cause of optimism. Now, I would also hopefully in the fullness of time we'll find out what exactly went on with the Broncos and Rodgers and Hackett when Hackett was appointed. But of the teams who missed, and from either conference, who do you think should be kind of facing into this offseason going, next year we should be in the playoffs?
So it's kind of a cop-out answer to say, because they were right there and there was a bunch of injuries that kind of took them out of it. But the Bengals will more than likely be in the playoffs again next year. They're going to get Joe Burrow back. I think they have some major questions as well regarding the future of T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, DJ Reader's a free agent, Jonah Williams is going to be a free agent. But they have shown that they can make shrewd decisions both in the free agency pool and in the draft pool. And if they need an offensive tackle or receiver, there's a really good class to need an offensive tackle or receiver. So if you say, hey, we'll let T walk, we can draft a guy at 18 or something, or even if we let Jonah Williams walk and franchise tag T, they have so many different ways of going about this portion of the Bengals era and under Joe Burrow and Zach Taylor. But having Joe Burrow there and having Jamar Chase and having Lou Anarumo still calling that defense is going to be it's like their force multiplier. It brings your floor a lot higher and it also raises your ceiling. Now you just need the requisite support from all the other guys on the team and all the support from the front office. Their DBs were really young. They got burnt a lot this year, but that's what happens when you're really young. It's kind of trial by fire. The Chiefs had it happen last year, and then they won the Super Bowl because it's the Chiefs. But I think the Bengals next year, they'll more than likely be in the playoffs. When it comes to the NFC, it's really interesting. I think there are a lot of really intriguing teams where you can say, oh, they missed the playoffs. I think they can make it back. I'm going to go with the Vikings. And the reason I say the Vikings is because Kirk Cousins was playing the best football of his career before he tore his Achilles. And if they decide to bring Cousins back, you have Cousins, you have two phenomenal tackles. You have Justin Jefferson. Jordan Addison was really good in his rookie year. TJ Hawkinson, again, coming off an injury, but played really, really well. And that defense got blood from a stone when it comes to what we thought they were going to have going into the season and finishing near the top 10 in almost every defensive metric. They have all the tools necessary to kind of make a run, like as a sneaky wild card pick. But I think I'd rock with the Vikings in the NFC.
Yeah, I think Kevin O'Connell has done a fantastic job there. It will be very interesting just to see what they intend to do at the QB position. In terms of I suppose the let's talk about the discourse, right? This year, it feels like this year, kind of more than any year, it became discourse, narrative. It was just like and there was that clip of George Santos talking about content and how you can't you want the content, but it felt like so after the game on Sunday, like the fourth down stuff, the stuff around analytics. We've seen it in terms of the QB stuff around Brock Purdy. We saw it last year around Herbert and Tua. We see it even in the Ben Johnson stuff. Like it's reported the insider is like he's asking for too much money, and 13 minutes later he's like, I don't know why people are saying he was asking for too much money. It's like, hang on, you just said it 3 tweets ago. Yep. I'm just is this ever going to end, or is this just going to get louder and louder because there's so much noise that people need to scream the loudest? And I ask you as somebody who doesn't, you don't do that. So like, what is it like as somebody who doesn't engage in that sort of stuff, sitting on the sideline, but who is involved in covering the league?
Oh, this is never going to end. The content, the discourses, they will never, ever, ever, ever end. Because every time some guy's discourse gets disproven, they flip it. It's changed. Now we're onto a new discourse. I think when it comes to the hot topic of analytics and fourth down stuff, we've been doing this for like 5 years, man. We got to give it a break. We got to give it a rest. I think we're taking a lot of what Dan Campbell did and we're like, oh, the numbers, all the analytics. Dan Campbell never said anything about analytics and numbers when he was talking about going forward on fourth down. He talked about feel and the feel that the Lions knew what they were doing. The Lions were really good on 4th and 3 or less, and their kicker was very bad from the high 40s and 50-yard range. That's if you want numbers, those are the numbers they reference. I think the thing that we have lost when it comes to analytics versus like film guys, tape guys, like manly man football, I guess, is they've always been connected. It has never been an either or. Even before like the numbers and analytics quantified what coaches were seeing already, if before a game, leading up into the week of preparation, if a coach is watching film and says, hey, every time they line up in 12 personnel with both tight ends to the right, they run outside zone. That's analytics. Every time they're in third and short and they run duo, that's analytics. That's what they're doing. It's always been connected. It's always been there. But I think we have created such a binary where it's either this or that. And that really just kind of comes down to like a general like thought on like everything, almost everything in the world. We've created so it's either this or that when it never really has been this or that, or most things have never been this or that. But they've always been connected. They've always intertwined. It has always been you need the analytics and you also need the film and the feel to create a holistic like base for this for coaching and managing this sport. And Dan Campbell has done this before and it works. I feel like we do this every time when it doesn't work, but we don't do it when it does work. So it's just the discourses will never end. The quarterback discourses will never end. They are the most popular people in the sport. They're always the ones that get all the blame, but all the credit as well. We will never, ever end quarterback discourse. Nothing changes. Eat at Arby's.
Just, I just wish it could be a little more nuanced because it just feels like, as you said, like the noise is crazy. Like about around Brock Purdy, he's like he's either you have to have him ranked alongside Brady or Montana, or you think he is the worst QB, and you can't believe that Kyle Shanahan, he really should just go and pluck somebody from the stands and pop them in because they essentially do the same piece. That is definitely a frustration of mine that I have. I suppose just a couple of more pieces. I'm interested in, Jim Harbaugh's return to the league, and I remember when Harbaugh reading a piece, and I think it came out maybe a year after he left the Niners, and it talked about it was a proper profile of him, and it talked about why there was such buy-in initially. By the end, it had gone kind of sour from both, I suppose, front office viewpoint, but also with the players. Like basically, guys like sitting down beside them in the canteen every day, like, "Hey guys," and it's like, "Oh, Jim again, okay." But do your team now are dealing with his former GM. He's come into the Chargers where they don't have a GM currently. They decided to get Harbaugh first, which I guess would lead one to believe he'll have, quite a bit of say. I mean, they'll put somebody in there. But do you think that the Jim Harbaugh that is coming back into the league has learned lessons from what happened previously? And do you think that going to the Chargers with look, they're over the cap, but they can make changes. They need to change anyway because I would argue they're old and slow. But Jim Harbaugh with Justin Herbert in the AFC West, how dangerous can they be, JP?
So I think the first thing that we have to understand about Jim Harbaugh is even despite all the stuff that happened in San Francisco between him and Trent Baalke, which seems majority like Trent Baalke issues, he won games. He won a lot of games. He wins a lot of games everywhere he goes. The Chargers lacked identity for the last few years. For most of the Chargers teams have lacked identities. Jim Harbaugh brings him an identity of toughness, physicality. That's going to be emphasized for this team, a team that has lacked physicality. The Chargers were pretty soft in the previous few years, in the previous regimes. I think, of course, like you said, this team is very old and top heavy. The depth is very bad. The secondary is very bad. The restructuring of the contracts is going to happen. You have to just to kind of get back above water. But I think when it comes to pairing him with a GM, I think they're expected to hire the Ravens director of player personnel, Joe Hortiz, which of course it's perfect for Jim Harbaugh, getting someone who knows the Harbaugh mind. I'm sure Jim and Joe Hortiz have had the conversations beforehand about his brother John. And so they're having somebody come from that, like someone who knows how to speak Harbaugh. Harbaugh is a very unique language. He has said, and of course he's changed his mind, but he said that chickens are a nervous bird, so he does not eat chickens. The man drinks milk religiously. That is a very unique language. It is a very like football coach language. And getting someone who knows the Harbaugh language is going to be perfect for them. I don't think it's going to be instant success because of just they need a lot of help. Like you have the quarterback, but that you still need help receiver wise. What happens with Mike Williams is going to be very interesting. What happens with Austin Eckler going to be very interesting. And defensively, oh boy, there's a lot of holes and a lot of money tied up into Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, both of whom could get restructured or be cap casualties. So I think it's going to take maybe a couple years, but just best believe they will win games. They will win a lot of football games because that's what Jim Harbaugh does.
If you're not familiar with a Dutch football manager named Louis van Gaal, I would say he too speaks a very unique language, has very unique views. He's hilarious also. He's definitely worth checking out. And the piece, the Harbaugh piece I loved most recently was how he greeted his brother, and then 6 seconds later how he greeted Josh Johnson, which was truly the contrast was magnificent. Final two then. How are you feeling about the Jaguars going into the off season after what can only be described as a really disappointing back end to the campaign?
I would even go further than that and say the back end of last season was a disaster. It was a failure. This is the biggest offseason in my existence as a Jaguars fan because you have now run out of the leeway of you have the quarterback on a rookie deal, plus you're in the AFC South, which kind of sucks. The AFC South don't suck anymore. There's at least two other teams in there that are going to make noise, and the Titans, who always seem to just be your boogeyman. So this offseason is about not being complacent. You have to make changes to this team. You have to do something different. Something has to change. They got rid of the entire defensive staff. Hire Ryan Nielsen. Phenomenal hire. I think with the defensive scheme change, they're going to need a defensive tackle. They're going to need a few more corners. But that's a phenomenal change. Offensively, you better figure it out because you're running out of that leeway, like I said, of having the quarterback on a rookie deal. Trevor Lawrence is still very good. I think we kind of let what happened this year, kind of cloud our brains on Trevor Lawrence, and just the overall, like, the offense was not good outside. The reason the Jaguars were partially like 8-3 was because Trevor Lawrence was kind of doing things to make sure that team was actually above ground. So this offseason is critical in terms of roster, talent acquisition, and not being complacent because the Texans won't be complacent. Colts won't be complacent. The Titans just fired Mike Vrabel, which crazy, like that's considering like he is one of their most successful coaches in their modern era. You cannot afford to be complacent this offseason. And I'm cautiously optimistic, but you never know with this team. You just never know.
And finally, so last summer you did coach combat as to which NFL coach would win in a street fight. I am wondering which current NFL head coach would cut the best wrestling promo.
Ooh, cut the best wrestling promo? I'm gonna go Nick Sirianni. Nick Sirianni would cut the best promo. He would be the traditional like wrestling heel who cuts the great promo but doesn't want to actually fight, doesn't want to wrestle. He just comes out, cuts the promo, and then kind of runs away from the good guy. Nick Sirianni has Big Dom to fight for him. That's like his he is Paul Heyman. Not as good as Paul Heyman is on the mic, but he is that type of heel. And then that makes Big Dom Brock Lesnar, which, it's very fitting. But Nick Sirianni would be my first pick, and then I think Dan Campbell, just the passion that he speaks with, I think he is one of the better. He'd be one of the better promos in the wrestling business. But Coach Mike Tomlin, very sneaky, underrated as a promo because he might not say much, but the facial expressions and the brevity of his phrases or sentences will be very, very good, and it'll be easy to catch on. It'll be like LA Knight saying "yeah" all the time. That's Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin just goes, "We do not care," and again, it creates this firestorm of a meme.
Yeah, I think Mike Tomlin cutting wrestling promos would be amazing. I also think if Sirianni would be the type, and not quite wrestling, and you may not remember, but Guns N' Roses, once upon a time, Axl's behavior started a riot, at which point they fled out of the the stadium where the concert was on and made it across state lines in order to not get arrested. Nick Sirianni would do exactly that. He would start trouble and he would get out of Dodge and he'd leave it to other people to clean up.
Oh yeah, he's definitely angering fans of Kansas City. He's like, it's quiet in here, like he's going up to Colts fans yelling, "This is for Frank Reich." Like, all right, man, sure. Like, you go ahead, dude. But he is definitely the wrestling promo in the NFL.
Yeah, I like the Paul Heyman comparison. JP, for people who aren't familiar with your stuff, they really should be acquainted with it. Where can they find you?
You can find me at SB Nation. I write about the NFL, NFL draft, college football. Anywhere where there's football being talked about, I'm probably going to be there. You can find me on Twitter at Acosta32_JP, JP Acosta32 on Threads. And I'm going to have some really cool stuff coming out. I'm going to be at the Super Bowl in Las Vegas. That'll be really fun to go and attend. I'll be doing some more NFL draft stuff, of course, but it's going to be just follow me, see what I'm doing, see where I'm going.
Excellent. Well, happy to hear that and appreciate you taking the time to chat to me today.
Awesome. Thank you for